Hello and welcome to Future Squared. Stephen Hawking once said that intelligence is the ability to adapt to change, so let's adapt. My name is Steve Goveski, and each week I'll bring you conversations with preeminent thought leaders from a variety of fields to help you think in a multidisciplinary way, keep goals in your professional and personal life, and better navigate what is fast becoming a brave, new world. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation accelerator that works with organizations to unlock their people's latent potential to create more impact for humanity and lead more fulfilling lives. If you need help driving your organization's innovation strategy, visit collectivecampus.io. And without further ado,
come with me if you want to live.
Welcome back to Future Squared for episode number 286 with Moresh Kokane. Moresh is the founder of real estate crowdfunding company Estate Baron and co-founder of next generation distributed share registry Konkrete. This conversation is very much a tale of two halves. The first half, we explore the mindset of the entrepreneur, what it takes to succeed, and various schools of philosophy that can help someone not only become a better entrepreneur or business leader, but a better person. We explore the book that changed Moresh's life, and I challenge Moresh on whether or not people are really in control of their choices. We also dive into why a healthy relationship with adversity is one of the key determinants behind anybody's success. The next 30 minutes, we explore blockchain, the decentralisation of money, and Moresh's startup Konkrete, which, full disclosure, Collective Campus is a JV investor in. But what we explore is an innovative, fully compliant fundraising method that Konkrete is leveraging and something that blockchain-based startups can learn from. I hope you'll enjoy this 90-minute deep dive conversation as much as I did. So with that, I bring you Konkrete's Moresh Kokane. Welcome to the show, Moresh.
Hey, thanks for having me, Steve.
That's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, all the way from Collective Campus, literally about 5 meters from my desk. So you obviously worked really hard to make it.
Yep. Got out of the bed, took a shower.
Yeah, exactly. But look, I guess I wanted to have you on the show because we've had a lot of impromptu conversations at Collective Campus, just around various topics pertaining to, say, entrepreneurship, pertaining to triumph over adversity, philosophy, blockchain, the decentralization of money, all sorts of good stuff. And I thought, well, rather than just enjoy these conversations on my own and be selfish, I may as well record one of these conversations and share it with the listeners of Future Squared. Also, I didn't have anyone else to interview this week, so that may have had something to do with it too.
That makes me feel far better.
But look, for our audience's benefit, I mean, obviously I know who you are, but for our audience's benefit, maybe give us the 2,000-foot view as to who Moresh Kokane is. Going back to, where you came from, the trials and tribulations over in the United States and what brought you to Australia.
Okay. I am a trained engineer. I did my engineering in India and then I was hired by a company in the US called the Northern Trust in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And I did some work for them. Then I worked for Brown Brothers Harriman, Grantham Waterloo in Boston. So I did some work. Then I came back to Chicago. But in the same time, I was doing some things offline, that is after work, and I did a startup and we did a online banking security product, and we sold it to a small to medium sized bank in India, and we made some money over there. So after doing that, I thought I knew everything about everything in entrepreneurship and how businesses are run.
Of course.
And I had a bit of money as well.
Naive confidence.
Oh, yeah, very naive. So I took the money and I decided that I want to solve all the problems of energy in the world. And this was around 2007, 2008 when price of oil was around $140 a barrel. So I was quite keen on solving some problems around energy. And when I was growing up, we had a lot of issues around electricity and we still do in India. So I came up with this technology called high concentrated photovoltaic. And I financed some students in India, in the India Institute of Technology as well as in Boston in MIT. We gave them money and they built out prototypes and the technology actually worked. But one of the hard things about hardware is it's unlike software, it takes a lot of money to get it going, and then commercialization is much more harder. So we couldn't commercialize it, and there were a lot of other issues as well. So that didn't work out, and I also learned that the only way to make a small fortune in solar is to start with a large fortune, and then you have a small fortune at the end. So then I decided I'm going to go back to what I know, which is finance, technology, investment banking. Went back to the US, continued my work over there. But this thing about being able to do something for your own has always been with me.
Where does that come from? Why do you think you've always had this desire to do your own thing?
That's a very good question. I think there are two types of people. People who believe that they have the ability to originate value. And there are people who believe that they are better off being a part of that value creation for somebody else.
Sure.
Now, you could obviously be wrong in the premise that the theory that you will be able to create value, originate value, but such people find it very hard to work for anybody else in the long run.
Well, 96% of startups fail, so clearly there's a lot of people who think that they can originate that value.
So, I mean, and I have sort of come up with various ideas over a period of time, and I've learned that the reason why most startups fail is because nobody wants their product. I mean, it's as simple as that. Nobody wants to pay for whatever they're building.
CB Insights released a report which said that that's number one reason is market failure.
I mean, there is no product market fit. Nobody wants what you're building. So getting that right is very hard. It took me a lot of permutations and combinations, pivots, if you may like, to get to where we are at right now. But eventually then, once you know that there is a market for what you're doing, then there is a different stage where you want to figure out how to build your team and scale it up. But to coming back to your previous question, I think I fall into the category of people who think they can originate value, and then it is really impossible to do anything else, because otherwise you're not doing justice to yourselves. See, we live life only once, and death comes to all of us.
Would you say there's a form of, say, cognitive dissonance that comes with feeling like you can create that value but not being in a position where you are doing so?
So I think the most important asset anybody has is their time. And if you're not making the best of it, if you are not doing the best, or if you're not being the best you can be, then I think that's a big waste. That's injustice. That's injustice to yourselves. So when I was in the States, although I was in a very cushy job, making more than 6 figures, could sleepwalk into what I was doing and was still getting reasonable accolades. People were quite happy with me, but I couldn't tolerate it because I wasn't able to do what I thought I would be really good at.
That's, just to double click on that. I mean, many of our listeners who have gone from the corporate world and become entrepreneurs, that's something that will resonate with them. And even myself, I was in the cushy 6-figure job at an investment bank, but was absolutely miserable and hating every minute of it. And
Absolutely.
For the weekend,
So, I mean, such kind of people, you can't really you can't sustain yourselves in that environment, because even though your bank balance keeps on increasing, your time balance is reducing. So
you become psychologically stunted in a way.
Yes. I mean, I can personally tell you that I've fallen asleep in Boston when I was working for a certain investment bank, and woken up and noticed that still nobody had noticed.
If you were working in an investment bank in Hong Kong, I think that would have been fine, because I was recently over in Hong Kong for a bit of work, and I found that over there, because their culture is one where they tend to stay out quite late, more or less. A lot of them tend to hit the bars every night. It's part of the culture there to socialize, to drink. So they work long hours, but what they do throughout the day, they have a hell of a lot of naps, and many of them take pillows with them to their desk.
I mean, I was clearly not supposed to be sleeping, but the point was the work was really not challenging enough, and I really thought that I could do better. But the current visa situation, and I'm a citizen of India originally, the current visa situation in the US is you couldn't work for yourselves unless you had a green card. And although I was already 8 or 9 years in the US, I wasn't able to work for my own thing. So I picked up The Economist magazine, which said Melbourne was the most livable city in the world. It had all nice things to say about Australia, and I agree with all of that. I thought Australia is going to do really good for itself over the next 30-40 years, which is probably the bulk of my rest of life. So I thought if I want to really do something, then I need to pack my bags, come to Australia, and that's exactly what I did. I got a PR, I applied for it, got it pretty quickly, came here, didn't know anybody, but that's the story so far.
Fantastic. And I guess if you picked up The Economist a year later, it may have been Vancouver in number 1 and you'd be living in Canada right now.
See, the thing is, because I lived in Chicago and Boston for bulk of my time in the US, I had no appetite for going to a more colder country. Vancouver is not as cold as other cities in Canada, but I really didn't want to spend 6 to 9 months in a dark, cold environment. I think Australia has spectacular weather. I mean, people complain about the Melbourne weather. They haven't seen anything. So Australia is fantastic. This is the best country in the world. Best weather, best lifestyle, best opportunities.
People complain about the Melbourne weather during the winter, but
this is nothing.
Spend your time in, say, the Eastern European winter where you've got 1 meter high snow and you can't get out of your driveway.
You have to scrape snow.
Exactly.
You have black ice. You slip on and fall all the time. This is fantastic. This is Disneyland.
It's comfortable. Like the coldest it really gets during the day in winter in Melbourne is maybe 10 to 11 degrees Celsius.
That's pleasant.
It's pleasant. You can almost wear a t-shirt in that weather.
So, I mean, I think Australians need to be more thankful for what we have over here.
Gratitude is a big thing, especially like what you're describing, entrepreneurship. Certain people are, let's explore that. Obviously, entrepreneurship is difficult and value creation is difficult. So if you maintain a sense of gratitude, then you have that psychological sort of solitude and fortitude to keep going despite the challenges, because there's lots to be grateful for despite some of the hardship. But with that, with there being two types of people in the world, do you think that's something that people are born with or something that they pick up along the way?
I think they pick up along the way. I think I don't really subscribe to the theory that people are born certain way. We are a product of our environment, and we are also a product of our choices. So when I say that, there are only certain things we can choose, but as long as we choose them correctly, you can be all set. So as long as you get the bigger picture thing correct, then everything else is about executing the smaller details. So, for example,
firm on vision, flexible on details.
Correct. So, what I mean by that is, when you are a child, and you are dependent upon your parents or your family, then you would naturally subscribe to their worldviews. So, for example, I did not grow up in a family which had any entrepreneurship in it. We also grew up in a country where questioning authority is frowned upon. We also fairly conservative from a social point of view. So till a certain age, we had to accept whatever that was. But beyond that, once you are in a position to stand on your own feet, then I think you're a product of your choices. And everything we do is a consequence of the choices we make. You can always complain that, I didn't have the option, but you always have an option. You just don't want to take the harder choice. So as long as you are willing to accept the consequences of your actions, I think life can, to some extent, be in your control. Obviously, you can't control everything all the time or even anything. But to give you an analogy, it's like sailing on the seas. There will be storms, but as long as you know how to sail, as long as you can navigate, as long as you know what you're doing, then you can chart your course. So that's what I mean by exercising initiative. So I don't think that we as human beings can always have things under control.
No.
But we can and we must, as human beings, decide what we want to do.
Yeah, and you can't be in control of what happens to you, but you're in control of how you choose to respond to what happens to you. I think that's the key difference. It's an interesting point, because it's something that I personally have more or less been struggling to reconcile in some way, because for very long I was, and I still am, a massive proponent of Stoicism, which is more or less about that mental fortitude and having ownership of your thoughts and how you choose to respond to external stimuli. You know, Seneca the Younger and Marcus Aurelius and all the writings of such great teachers such as them. However, at the same time, I'm familiar with philosophies like, say, determinism, but also the fact that if you look at human biology, many of us, well, we're all born with particular DNA and neurology, and certain people have a predisposition towards taking risk, whereas others have a predisposition towards certainty. And then if you take that a step further and you think about sitting still and trying to control the next thought that comes into your mind, oftentimes you can't do that, because thoughts just come and go. Most of the time we have thoughts that just come in there. We didn't voluntarily choose those thoughts, they just appear. So I guess what I feel is that a lot of people tend to have a predisposition towards thinking in the way that we do, which is we're in control of our thoughts, and if we have hardship, it's about us and how we choose to respond to that. But there may be a vast majority of people out there who perhaps aren't predisposed to even responding in that way to begin with.
I think that would be abdicating responsibility if we suggest that people are not hardwired to take decisions in a certain manner.
I agree.
That would mean that you are abdicating your personal choices. The biggest thing which separates human beings from animals is our ability to think. Now, it's completely true, and I agree with you, that certain groups of people, depending upon what environments, what cultural upbringing they have, and maybe to some extent biological reasons as well, are predisposed to certain types of things. But I think in the modern world where we are, where information is quite freely available, I think people, it's completely up to an individual to take in the information which they need to take in.
How do they know what to take in, and do they have the appetite to take that in to begin with, and are they predisposed to
having the appetite is also a matter of choice. So for example, you could say that, and I'm guilty of this as well, or a lot of, I mean, I want to stay fit and I want to exercise, but I don't want to wake up early. Okay, so again, it's a matter of choice. Am I willing to take that? Am I willing to be uncomfortable in the short run to achieve what I want to be in the long run? Now, for example, in India,
excuse that nitro coffee machine in the background. It's just recharging, I think, or doing something to that effect. Anyway, so back in India.
So back in India, I mean, we have a lot of smart people, but we do not have a culture where asking why is okay.
And challenging authority.
We have challenging authority. So we have a very hierarchical society and a very rigid social structure. Now the big problem with that is all innovation is a product of asking the question why. Okay, and these same people, I mean, there are a lot of Indians who have gone into the Western world and they have done well for themselves. They have established great companies, and their biology hasn't changed. But these people, these individuals, made individual choices about how they want to live their life. So, for example, I have a lot of cousins, and they are in India, and they live their lives in a very different manner. So my biology and their biology is exactly the same. And
well, it's probably not exactly the same.
Well, kind of the same. I mean, we share a lot of upbringing. We share a lot of traits.
That's not biology, though.
Well, we have similar stock. I mean, if that's the right term. But the point which I'm trying to make is, and it's not necessary that I'm doing spectacularly better than them at this point in time. I mean, they have done all right for themselves as well. But I made certain choices, which is why I'm here. They made certain choices, which is why they are there. So I think while we are a product of our environments, we are also a product of our choices. I think there is...
I agree. I mean, I'm definitely on the same page with you. We are the product of our choices, and the quality of our life is dependent upon the quality of our decisions. I guess just based on what I know about free will and biology and predispositions towards certain types of thinking and feeling and whatnot, is that certain people are predisposed to making those decisions and making the tougher decisions and facing adversity, whereas others may find it much more difficult to do that.
Yeah, I mean, for somebody who comes up, grows up in a hierarchical society, asking why is something which it won't come naturally to them.
Sure.
But if you are in the Western society, where asking why is probably the foundation of the Western society, then that is something which would come naturally to them, and that would in theory lead to better outcomes for them, which in turn forms a virtuous loop, which then keeps on compounding and then leads to much more bigger divergences in these societies. But having said that, and for example, if somebody grows up in a poorer family where they don't have a lot of things given to them, they don't have a lot of people to look up to, then achieving something in life for them is harder, but never impossible.
Of course.
Okay. And to some extent, somebody who overcomes higher adversity to get to a certain place is actually stronger than anybody who started with something.
Yeah.
And
pressure
those
creates
people,
diamonds.
Yeah. So those people will actually be able to go further because they are actually more okay with the risk, because they have already taken
pain.
Yeah. So they already are attuned, or they have already sort of gone through the tribulations of fire.
Yeah, they've developed a healthy relationship with adversity and struggle. And
so
pain.
Eventually, yes, a lot of the outcomes in life are dependent upon where we come from and what environment we came from.
Of course.
But we absolutely have a choice.
You have a choice.
We have a choice.
Sure. And I think what you said there as well around asking why is such an important lesson as well. I recently had Chip Conley on the show, who was Airbnb's head of hospitality and strategy, and he joined the company at the age of 52. He had never used Airbnb, he had never used Uber, basically not very tech literate, but he came from the world of boutique hotels, and he had developed or founded the second largest boutique hotel chain in the world. And what he said was that when he was in Airbnb, he would question a lot of things that most people half his age would not question, because they didn't want to look silly or didn't want to look like they were misinformed or uninformed, right?
Yeah.
And by asking these questions around why, they were able to find better ways of doing things. And not only that, but for his own, to satisfy his own curiosity and to develop his own understanding of the world, it served a two-pronged sort of purpose in terms of identifying better ways of doing things and also learning. So many people, I feel, self-censor their thoughts. If they don't understand something, they won't ask the question because they don't want to look silly. And that holds them back, and it also holds society back as well.
No, I think I think we need to encourage people to sort of get over the I might look silly thought process. I think Socrates was the one who said that he didn't know anything.
All I know is, the more I know, the more I know nothing, something along those lines.
So I think it's very important that at every point in time we have an open mind about the fact that we don't actually know everything. And within the organizations which we build, whether we are as leaders or whether we are working for somebody, we should try and foster culture, especially if you're a leader. We should try and foster a culture where asking questions is okay, and everybody gets an opportunity to present ideas as long as they are packed in a logical and reasonable manner. So and this is something which I try and practice at Estate Baron and Konkrete as well, anybody is in a position to present their line of action, and if their line of action is superior to even mine, then I should accept it.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think this whole notion of strong opinions weakly held is so powerful. You touched on it earlier, where your first foray into entrepreneurship gave you a lot of confidence and naivety about your capabilities and how easy it is. And I had the same thing when I was working at Macquarie Bank, and I founded Hot Desk while I was working there on the side, similar to yourself, and I managed to raise about $150,000 off the back of a $2,000 prototype, and I was like, yeah, this is easy, I'm made for this. And then shortly thereafter I realized just
I had like 10 or 15 different ventures.
Yeah.
And they were not exactly ventures, they were really ideas I was trying out. But I mean, it gave me a little bit of money at the start, but I quickly realized that I actually had got very lucky in my first attempt. Then through those 15 failures, I actually learned all the attributes which a successful business needs to achieve in order to even get off the ground.
Yeah.
And that's just getting off the ground. Then then the next step is building a team, scaling, building a big business,
which is where we are true, right now. And the more you learn, even today, I've been in this game now for about 7 years, and every day I learn something that I didn't previously know.
And that's where I think entrepreneurship is so much rewarding, because you learn so much on a daily basis, and you grow as an individual as well.
So much.
So only yesterday I learned a few things about compliance, and I felt I was in Disneyland. And it's very rewarding. I mean, yes, if you do it correctly, then there's a lot of money as well. But the fact that you're learning so much and you're becoming a better individual, is so much rewarding as being an entrepreneur rather than an employee.
And, I think maybe it's not true of all entrepreneurs. There are plenty of entrepreneurs out there who are driven purely by the bottom line, and lack that emotional intelligence, are terrible bosses and everything to that effect. But I think if you take it as more than just a job title and as a state of mind, as a lifestyle, and you take interest in becoming a better person, becoming a better leader, then you do develop a hell of a lot of transferable life skills that you can apply in your personal life, with your family, with your loved ones, just day to day showing up with different people. And I think in my case, I've definitely had to become a hell of a lot more self-aware, a hell of a lot more resilient, and psychologically sound as an entrepreneur than what I had to become previously, because previously in the corporate world I was just playing a role. All I had to do was just turn up, like you said, sleepwalk to work and just get through the day, watch the clock, collect my paycheck, thank you very much, do my 4 weeks leave to somewhere tropical every year, and that was it, and drink on Friday night. And it didn't really require me to develop myself as a person, so long as I could just satisfy the functional and or technical requirements of that role. Entrepreneurship is totally different, and you talked about building a culture of asking questions and challenging each other, so you have that healthy discourse to come up with better solutions. And up on our wall here we've got some of our values, which is things like experimentation, radical transparency, so being comfortable telling people what you think, doesn't matter if they're more senior than you. Extreme ownership, so if something goes wrong, acknowledging that, tracing the journey from start to end, what could you have done better, and then what can you do to make it better now. Emotional intelligence, like these are all things that I never even had to think about as an employee.
I mean, I look at what kind of an individual I was around 10 years back, and now where we are at. I mean, I have a lot of journey to cover, but I know so much more now than what I used to, and I still need to learn more. But the growth, the learnings which have happened, and the amount of learnings which happen on a daily basis is far more than what I could achieve in even a year or 2 years or 3 years when I was working as an corporate employee. So even just that factor, I mean, obviously if you get your business correct, then there's a lot of money to be made as well, but the rewards of entrepreneurship go much more beyond that.
Couldn't agree more. And I mean, going back to what you were saying earlier around choice and human beings being in control of that choice, I know you're a big fan of Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, and you have encouraged me to pick up a copy, and I know Peter Thiel also is a massive proponent of this book, which I guess preceded or gave birth to the philosophy of objectivism, the power of human beings to create the autonomy that we should have over our decisions, and the responsibility we should have over our decisions and what happens thereafter, and about just unleashing that latent potential of human beings to create good in the world. Now, after having listened to you talk about that book, I did recently pick up a copy. It is about 1,250 pages long, and I read War and Peace last year, Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. So I needed a good break after reading that 1,400-page book. And the thing about 1,200-page books is, I like to read, and when you pick up a 1,200-page book, it basically means you can't read anything else for at least a month, depending on how much time you have or how fast you read. But I am about 100 pages in, and I am starting to appreciate the appeal of Atlas Shrugged. But tell me about your relationship with this book. When did you read it? How many times have you read it? And what were some of the key lessons that you took out of this book?
I think Atlas Shrugged changed my life.
Wow, it's a big statement.
Yeah, and I fully understand what that means, and I say it with full appreciation of that. Atlas Shrugged changed my life for the better. Mm-hmm. I think fundamentally the philosophy which is laid down in Atlas Shrugged is something which I already subscribe to. Mm-hmm. What Atlas Shrugged gave me is a very good grounding and a clearer appreciation of what that philosophy is all about. Mm-hmm. More importantly, it removed a lot of guilt in terms of what value creators should have. Mm-hmm. So I read Atlas Shrugged around 6 years back, yep. I think. And I think any book or any piece of philosophy which you pick up, you need to pick up at a certain point in your life.
You need to be ready for it.
You need to be ready for it.
Yep.
You can't read it too early. Now, if I had read that book when I was in college, I don't think I would have appreciated it enough. Mm-hmm. But because I picked it up after I had a certain amount of work experience as well as life experience, I think I had a better understanding of it.
You need to be in a place where you're asking the questions.
Correct. And when I started reading the book, every page spoke to me. Mm-hmm. I thought I was a character in the book. I could relate to every single circumstance which was described in the book. Mm-hmm. And the emotional foundation or the philosophical or logical foundation which is laid down in the book has helped me personally a lot. The biggest takeaways from the book is, I would say, personal responsibility and not apologizing for doing what you do. So I think there are certain things in life which you cannot teach people. You can only have people learn it for themselves. Yep. So in the Gita, actually, the Gita is the Hindu mythological book. Mm-hmm. So they frown upon proselytizing. Okay, so they don't say, there's a specific verse over there which says that you shouldn't go and teach people that this is what you should and should not do. Mm-hmm. They should come and ask the right questions for it.
Yes.
They should ask first and then you can give. So if anybody asks, then that means that they are already in the right position to accept the right answers. But if you go and tell them that this is what you should be doing, then number one, they will never accept it because they are not in the right mental state as well. Yeah. And again, the same thing about having people ask first is true of another group which I'm part of, which is the Freemasons. Even now, the Freemasons is something which a lot of people think is a secret society. It is not.
Like the stonecutters in The Simpsons?
No. So
did you get paddled on your way in, or?
So the Freemasons are more a society with secrets rather than a secret society. I mean, everybody knows Freemasons exist. So if it was a secret society, then we are doing a very bad job of maintaining our secrecy.
This is true.
And it has nothing to do with the secrets, but everything to do with the ability to keep a secret. But I digress. The point which I'm trying to make is, in order to join Freemasons, you need to ask to be a Freemason. Nobody will come and say to you that, do you want to be a Freemason? And if you ask, and as long as you meet certain criteria, everybody will welcome you. So the same thing applies to the teachings of Atlas Shrugged as well. It's something which you have to find for yourselves. You have to ask the right questions and figure it out for yourselves. So I'm not going to divulge it all.
No, that's fair. There's about 1,200 pages to unpack, so there's only so much we can explore in this podcast. But I think with any philosophical system, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You need to be ready for it.
Yeah.
It's like that old tale, I think it's of Plato and Aristotle, walking along the water. And I believe Aristotle was Plato's protege. And Aristotle asked something like, tell me the truth. And Plato got his head, ducked it in the water, and then about 30 seconds later pulled it up, right? And Aristotle, all shaken, said, why did you do that? And Plato said, when you want the truth like you wanted water, like you wanted air right now, then come and speak to me. Because he didn't think he was ready.
Yeah. No, I'm not suggesting that you or anybody of our audience is not yet ready. But
no,
I think,
that's not what I'm suggesting at all, but you need to be...
Yeah, I think you get a better appreciation of certain things when they are laid down in a certain manner. To simply put, I think it has taught me a lot about personal responsibility. So, like, coming back from our previous point about certain people being predisposed to certain sort of style of thinking as well as risk-taking, etc.
Yeah.
But what it has also taught me is personal responsibility. You can have bad circumstances. You can have things not go your way. But if you sit and complain about it, then that's not going to change anything.
No.
I think we as individuals are really responsible for our own lives. Nobody else is responsible for your life.
No.
As long as people just get that, as long as people understand just that much, that whatever issues you have in your own life, you are responsible for it and you alone can solve them.
Yeah.
I think the world will be such a better place. Just if everybody understood that.
Of course. And
our problems are really our own. Nobody else cares about it. We have to fix them ourselves.
Could not agree more. And on that point, Marcus Aurelius makes the point that you are in control over your mind, not external events.
Yeah.
Realize this and you will find strength. Now, the teachings of guys like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus and Seneca are very much about being the masters of our own domain. And it doesn't matter what happens outside of us, we can find that place of inner strength and that principle, virtuous-driven life, virtue-centered life, rather. Now, a question I've posed to various high-energy entrepreneurs and thinkers on these podcasts in the past is, how do you reconcile an appreciation for philosophies like Stoicism, for example, which I know you're also a proponent of? How do you reconcile, meditation or mindfulness, that inner calm, with the ambition and drive that comes with entrepreneurship? Because some people ask the question, well, if I become all philosophically driven and I meditate and I'm calm and I've got this clear outlook on life, is that going to quench that fire that's been driving me to build this business in the first place? And I mean, I've got views on that, but what are your views on
I think if you're going to be an entrepreneur, then the number one thing which you need to understand is there are huge highs and terrible lows. And they come and go with very high frequency. So within a matter of the same day, within a matter of hours, you can have a great high, and within the next few hours, you could feel like the world has come to an end and you need to jump off a cliff.
Yeah.
So if you are going to remain an entrepreneur, then you need to sort of separate yourselves from all of that a bit. And you need to understand that you need to keep calm, whether or not you have a big high or whether you have a big low. So having that level of dissociation from external stimuli is, I think, an absolute necessary attribute of being an entrepreneur.
Does it compromise your drive and hunger?
Absolutely not. In fact, that is something which is a necessity to be an entrepreneur. If you struggle and if you're not able to deal with the tremendous lows which come very, very frequently as part of entrepreneurship and the entrepreneur life, you won't last.
Yep.
And in fact, having that ability to remain calm when things are falling around you would mean that you would have preserved your energy which you need when the opportunity is right.
Yeah.
So being excited and high is not the same as being high energy. So you can have high energy and be productive and have a strong drive, but that does not need to be reflected in your behavior.
Yep.
So you don't need to have manic high fives and yay and all those, as well as cry.
Crush it.
Yeah. Don't need any of that.
Yep.
So there are a lot of people who are calm and quiet and deliver great results, and I think you wouldn't see Jeff Bezos sort of jumping up and down the street if he sort of achieved something. And I think the people who achieve lasting success understand it. You need to be able to separate yourselves from the manic highs and lows, which are part and parcel of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And that's the only way you would have the energy to deliver when the time is right.
Agreed.
As part of entrepreneurship, a lot of times things don't go your way, and there are long periods in which there is a lull. Nothing happens. I mean, there is a ship, we are on a ship and there is no wind. I mean, everything you try, nothing happens, nothing moves. And unfortunately, there is nothing you can do about it. You can only try and move so many levers.
Yep.
And at that point, you need to be sort of be okay with what's happening and sort of survive till the next day, so that you will still be there when the wind picks up.
Yeah, and it's funny how much different the world looks the next morning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, on that point, I think that's worth digging into. I imagine you've seen Wall Street, the movie.
Which one?
The first one, of course, featuring Michael Douglas did have a cameo in part 2, but with good old Charlie Sheen, who incidentally I think also had a cameo in part 2, but nonetheless not important.
I haven't seen part 2 actually.
It's okay. It's worth seeing at least once, but not worth seeing like 20 times, like the amount of times I've seen Wall Street 1. But in that movie, Bud Fox's associate, Lou Mannheim, the much older grey-haired associate of his, as Bud is in handcuffs and being taken off to the local county jail, I imagine, for insider trading and things to that effect, Lou looks over and says, "Man stares into the abyss, sees nothing staring back at him." At that point, man finds his character. And I think entrepreneurship, like you said, you're going to have your highs and you're going to have your very debilitating lows.
Yeah.
But having that presence of mind to just disassociate yourself from that and move forward regardless will build that character so that you can face, the abyss and keep going.
Yeah, entrepreneurship is all about looking into the abyss and saying not today.
Yeah.
Yeah, not today.
That's great. Yeah. 100%. And one other thing before we move on, just on reconciling drive with clarity, I think it really comes back to what drives you in the first place. Because you're going to have some people out there who perhaps are driven by insecurity and they want to show the world that they're better than what people think they are, right? Yeah. But if they then find, say, philosophy and meditation and things of that sort, that may just throw water on that fire because they realize that, well, I'm driven by stuff outside of myself. And once you find that principle-centered life, you may lose some of that desire. But if you're driven by something greater, like creating value in the world, if you're driven by purpose, I think you will actually see philosophy, you will see mindfulness, meditation, all these different tools in the arsenal as helping you get closer to achieving your...
Yeah, and when I was a bit younger, I sort of dabbled into a few different philosophies as well. I read the Gita, I read the Bible, I read a bit of the Quran as well. And to be completely honest, I couldn't sort of... it didn't compute for me. I mean, it didn't seem logical. Even my own religion, Hinduism, I'm not a practicing Hindu, but I'm not an atheist either. My religion props up when the flight goes into turbulence and I feel that I should be praying. But the point
so you're agnostic then? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, my agnosticism, I become far more religious when the plane starts moving.
Yeah. Oh, what do people say? Spiritual but not religious.
So, where was I?
We're talking about purpose.
Yeah. So the
schools of philosophy that you dabbled with, not really giving you the nourishment you were after. So a lot of times I felt that all these religions were teaching that you need to look for an afterlife.
And that's where you achieve your peace, and that's where you achieve your nirvana, if that's the right term. And do certain things, and then you will have a better afterlife. But who knows whether or not there is an afterlife?
Yeah.
I mean, it may be there, it may not be there. Does it mean that I should stop being productive in my current life? And that's where I don't think most religions in the world have an answer. And I think that's where Atlas Shrugged has a very good answer. It teaches about the value of here and now, being productive, and also not being apologetic about it.
Yeah.
It gives a very good grounding. And that's why when I say Atlas Shrugged changed my life, it not only taught me about entrepreneurship and about personal responsibility, but it also helped me resolve a lot of spiritual questions as well.
It's a philosophical doctrine for the 21st century, I think. Because
I think it's a philosophical doctrine for all times.
Yeah.
I know it sounds a little bit absolutist, where, for example, the Muslims and the Christians and all those people say that their religious books are doctrines for all time.
Of course.
But one of the fundamental premises of Atlas Shrugged is it asks people to follow reason. And that's one of my founding principles as well.
Are people reasonable though?
People may not be reasonable, but individuals can have the choice to make decisions based upon reason.
Try and be as reasonable as possible.
In fact, Atlas Shrugged understands that there will be people who are not open to reason, and it also lays down what you do in that particular scenario.
And you can't reason with people who didn't come to their position through reason.
Yeah. So, for example, the eventual goal which most entrepreneurs have is making a lot of money, and I have that goal as well, and there's nothing wrong with it. But money can be made through a lot of ways. Either you can rob somebody, which is force. You have
experimented with that approach, Moresh?
I'm not very physically well built, so I think it will not end very well.
There's other mechanisms you can use.
So the second thing is stealing.
Yes.
Which means that I'm taking what you have.
Seeing another side of Moresh.
Yeah. So in both cases, value is going from point A to point B. The third option is applying emotional force.
Yes.
For example, you could have a brother who is mooching off you, or you could have a family member who is mooching off you, or you could have a religious leader who is mooching off you, or you could have a government which is taxing you. So those people are applying emotional force. So in all of those cases, value is moving from one side of the equation to another. But when you're an entrepreneur, or when you're a businessman, or when you're a trader, I'm giving you something which you want, and you are giving me something which I want. So there is an exchange of value, and we are both better for it, and more value is created, which in turn creates a virtuous loop, and everybody is better off. So that's where Atlas Shrugged sort of lays down the foundation of what sort of value transfer is more fundamentally suitable.
Yeah, and the reason why I say it's a philosophical doctrine for the 21st century in particular is because up until, say, recently, people could put quite a bit of faith into finding a job, welfare systems and things of that sort. But as technology gains greater prominence in society, in the business landscape in the 21st century, a lot of jobs which existed yesterday will no longer be there, right?
Absolutely.
And a lot of white-collar jobs, legal services, accounting, and so on. Yeah. You're going to need to take greater ownership over your life, over your career, over your own income-producing potential.
We are in an epoch. We are in an era of great change. Things are going to move very fast. And the people who are going to not upskill themselves or not be willing to accept change and sail it will quickly find that they are redundant. And you may think that you have a 6-figure cushy job and you are doing well for yourselves, but suddenly there will be a piece of technology which will automate what you're doing, or there will be somebody in India or Philippines or China who will do what you're doing at a fraction of a cost. And suddenly the business would say that you're no longer relevant.
Yeah.
So you can either stay in front of the curve of change, or you can get crushed by it.
Well, yeah, what's changing faster, the world outside your building or the world inside it? And if it's changing faster on the outside, then you're in trouble.
Water always finds its lowest level. You may think that you can batten down the hatches, close down the doors, and you will be protected from the world. But eventually, the water will come gushing in. So one of the big things which I couldn't reconcile for a very long period of time is we were taught when I was growing up that India is a great country, we have a great culture, etc.
I think every inhabitant of every country is taught that.
But then how is it possible that people from a small island 5,000 miles away came in a small ship or like small ships, and then they ruled a country of 400 million people at that point in time? Was it that they were braver than us? No. I mean, I think people are equally brave in all parts of the world. So what is it that they were able to bring to the table which these people did not have? And in our history books, we were taught that they always cheated, which doesn't really make sense. I mean, you can't cheat all the time.
Who is they? Who are you referring to?
The British. For example, the British ruled India, and we were taught they always won every battle through cheating. So that's absolute nonsense. Because either that means that, or they said that we were taught that the British always bribed one of the princes who then sort of became a traitor to his country, etc., etc. But that's all nonsense. Because you can't do that each time. Because and if you are able to do that each time, that means that your people are really, really don't really care for your country in the first place.
But I think there's also sorry to interrupt you there, Moresh, but I think there's a lesson in that, because in society, in business, you may have competitors, and you may look at your competitor and think, just say a bunch of nasty things about them, they're this, they're that. But if they're doing well, rather than try and put them down to make yourself feel better, maybe find out what they're actually doing.
Exactly. So the reason why I think the British did well is, number one, they came out of their country. They put themselves out of their comfort zone. The fact that they were 5,000 miles away. Yeah. So when Cortes came into South America, he burned his ships. So the people who come and burn their ships, they have to fight. Yeah. And then you have to think on your feet, come up with innovations, live off the land, and that makes you a better fighter, and that helps you survive better.
Sun Tzu said the same thing. He said, burn bridges.
Yeah, land on the beach, and armies fight better. So Pizarro, again, another explorer, again, same thing. He came into Peru, I think, and he burnt his ships. Yeah. So
it's funny that even in the modern world, this is probably not a great example, but in terms of how wholesome it is. But Jordan Belfort was it Stratton Oakmont? The Wolf of Wall Street. Yeah. He encouraged all of his Boilermaker room traders to just leverage the hell out of their lives, buy the most expensive car, buy the most expensive house, that they would have to turn up to work every day and hustle like crazy just so that they could service all of these loans.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that is one way to look at it. And,
not a great way, but it's true.
If it works for somebody, great. Yeah. But I think the underlying principle is correct. If you are going to do something, then you shouldn't do it halfway. You have to stake everything on it, because if you're doing it halfway, then that's the easiest way to fail, because then you are neither here nor there. If you're going to do something, either do it or you don't do it. There is nothing in between.
So what Yoda says, do or do not, there is no try.
There's no try.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, well, maybe we'll hop, skip and jump away from the world of life philosophies and start talking a little bit more about blockchain, decentralization of money, the history of money. To give our audience a little bit of background, you obviously came into our sort of world via the Charter Hall Accelerator. Yep. We partnered, or Collective Campus partnered with Charter Hall to run Australia's first PropTech Accelerator. We went to market looking for 4 startups. We targeted about 300. We got over 50 applications, and then we selected 4 to participate in this program, one of which was one of the companies that you founded called Estate Baron. Give us the 2,000-foot view of Estate Baron, and then perhaps we'll move on to talk about Konkrete and blockchain.
Yeah, so Estate Baron is a property development crowdfunding company. What we do is we help property developers raise funding for their development projects. And although we say crowdfunding, it is fundamentally an IPO. Yeah. And what we do is we help property developers come up with legal structures which help them raise money from mom and dad investors all across Australia in a fully compliant manner. And we also have built technology solutions, which means that they can run it under their own brand.
Yeah.
And we have around 3,000 plus investors who invest in their projects.
How much have you raised on the platform for developers?
For the developers, it's closer to 15 million. And the developers directly using our own systems have raised close to 40 million, slightly upwards of 40 million. It took me around 2 years to figure out the compliance, but in the last 1 year, we have done around 15 projects.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I guess through the accelerator program, we got to know each other quite well, got to understand what you were working on, and also understand the person behind the business, which is the most important thing in any entrepreneurial pursuit. It's not about the idea, it's not about the technology, it's about the people behind the business and whether or not they have what it takes to play the long game, going back to what we've been discussing for the last 50 odd minutes or so on this show. And we identified an opportunity to take what you were doing with Estate Baron, but evolve it somewhat to Konkrete. So what's Konkrete all about?
So, like you said, I was very fortunate to be selected in the Charter Hall Accelerator run by Collective Campus. And as part of the accelerator program itself, I was able to fine-tune a lot of things which I was doing at Estate Baron, so that I was able to focus on certain things, automate other things, delegate other things. So that by itself helped me grow a lot in Estate Baron itself. And as part of Konkrete, what we are really doing is we are basically evolving Estate Baron itself. So right now with Estate Baron, we were limited to Australian investors only. With Konkrete, we can reach to a much more wider global network of investors, people who are invested in Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other sorts of crypto. Now they will be able to use that and invest in securities on the blockchain. So number one, we will be able to reach a much wider audience of investors. And number two, because things are on the blockchain, there is an implicit liquidity to it. Because as you know, the way blockchain works is you don't need a centralized party to track all the transactions. Any transfer is automatically reflected across the chain, and positions and balances get updated. So that is something which we are leveraging for securities. So what
kind of securities, what might some of the applications of Konkrete actually be?
In theory, we have a focus on real estate and property development in particular. But in theory, this can support any type of security, which means it can support businesses, it can support investment funds, it can support derivatives, FXs, forwards, futures. So Konkrete as a business is a distributed share registry, and our primary focus is going to be supporting typically illiquid real estate assets, but in the long run, it can support any type of securities. So it's a little bit like the ASX on the blockchain, but it will be global. So it's far more bigger than any of that.
Great. So let's park Konkrete for a second and just dive into the crypto market. Now, obviously there was a frenzy late last year where, say, Bitcoin was worth over $20,000, and then very quickly thereafter I think that was December, and then by February it was worth 6,000. And since then the crypto market has more or less flatlined, in the ensuing 7 to 8 months. There's not been much upwards trajectory. There's been a few blips on the radar, a few peaks, a few troughs, but more or less Bitcoin, for example, has been flatlining around the $6,000 mark if you look at the trend line. Going back to that hype cycle back in, say, November last year, what are your thoughts on that in terms of, my thought around the whole ICO hype cycle back then is that ICOs can be a very powerful tool for entrepreneurs who are purpose-driven, who want to go out there and create value, who embody the philosophies we've been talking about, who have what it takes to raise funding from the crowd, rather than just, say, venture capitalists. And rather than just making the rich richer, it's an opportunity to raise money from the crowd and divert that wealth, but also empower people to go out there, create value, make the world a better place, and act on their vision. But what we saw was a lot of ICOs that raised a bunch of money and then went missing, or just didn't execute on what they proposed, and therefore people's faith in ICOs, people's faith in cryptocurrency subsided. And we had that startup, who was at Prodium. Now, they're a bit more of a comical case because they only raised $11 via an ICO, and then the very next day they shut down their website. Well, they didn't shut down the website, but they left a one-page website behind, which was completely white and had one word on it in black, which said penis, and that was it. I think that was more or less trolling the whole ICO movement and the crypto hype cycle at the time. But I mean, what are your views on that hype cycle? And I mean, what should we be doing instead to give people the confidence in cryptocurrencies and in startups that are raising money through these mechanisms?
My number one thought is, why didn't I get in sooner? I mean, I wish I would have done an ICO.
Yeah, I think we've all got those stories. I think it was about 4 years ago where I wanted to drop $5,000 on Bitcoin, and this was 4 or 5 years ago. This was around the time that Mt. Gox went under. Yeah. And I thought, lucky I didn't get in, but I would have had the opportunity back then to buy when it was about $50, I believe, after that exchange crashed. So obviously would have made quite a pretty penny on that, but whatever.
Yeah, but I think every groundbreaking technology goes through these cycles of boom and bust.
Yes.
So especially when the .com thing happened in the early 90s, there was pets.com and there was all sort of .com things.
Everything.com, drugstore.com.
Which raised a bunch of money, and then there was a spectacular crash.
Yes.
But what people
so Mark Cuban, you got out in time.
Yep. So what people miss out from that is there are a lot of companies which came out of that, and they survived through it, and the world is a better place. The companies are stronger. So I think that's something similar which is going to happen to blockchain. There will all of these people who have sort of gone through the boom and bust cycle. So a lot of them will disappear, but there will be a pruning, and the market will be better off for it. I think there should be an appreciation for what blockchain can really do and what ICOs in particular can do. I think the concept of ICOs is fundamentally fine. That is where you are giving away tokens for future use in the system. But what happened was these tokens were used as a speculatory asset, and they were traded on markets which had no controls and checks and balances. So what happened was a lot of insider trading, a lot of market manipulation. The oldest scams in the book around markets were dusted off, and because these so-called tokens were not treated as financial securities, typical financial market regulation did not apply, which meant that a lot of people got burnt. I think a lot of people now see the importance of regulation in particular, especially to markets.
So with regulation, Moresh, I mean, I had Kevin Kelly on this show about a year and a half ago, and we were talking about regulation being important because obviously it gives the markets confidence. It's there to protect consumers. At least it should be there to protect consumers. But there is a risk that if you regulate too early, that you won't allow the technology to blossom and show us what it's really capable of. I mean, what are your views? Or is this the time to regulate, or is it about regulating with a softly approach? What's your view?
I think the debate about regulation in the securities and blockchain space is a bit uninformed, because a lot of people who are actually making these so-called statements do not actually have a very strong understanding of the regulatory frameworks. The Australian regulatory framework is actually quite flexible, and existing laws can work perfectly fine. And that's what we have been doing at Estate Baron. I mean, a lot of people were complaining about how Australia does not have the so-called crowdfunding laws for a long period of time. A lot of people complained about how the laws which came in were insufficient. A lot of people complained about how they should allow PTYs, etc., without actually understanding that already the laws existed, and they didn't understand why those laws existed. The foundation of securities regulation is based upon two pillars. One is disclosure. You explain clearly what people are investing in. And second is audits, having third-party checks to explain, to ensure that the money is being spent the way it is being spent. Now, so I think the question is whether you should be regulating softly or whether you should be regulating strongly is not the right question. The regulation as it stands works. And I think I will give a lot of credit to ASIC, who have put out a lot of information papers, regulatory guides around the founding principles about how they will apply regulation. Australia has what is called in principles based regulation, which means there is no black letter law, which means that it is quite flexible. ASIC has a
how you
very
interpret it.
They will go by a principles approach about how things should work, what are the foundations on which things should work off. And to their credit, they have been applying it quite judiciously. There was a period of time, especially mid to late last year, in which there was a big wild west. And because markets were not regulated the way they should be, a lot of people got burnt.
Well, I've heard that a lot of companies that raised via the ICO mechanism last year are actually now in a bit of trouble because ASIC has recognized their funding as a commodity and is now chasing them with 30% tax.
ATO.
Sorry?
ATO.
The ATO rather, and because the crypto market has dropped, a lot of these startups that raise big bags of money and millions of dollars are unable to pay these tax bills.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are going to raise money for running your business, then I think you should give away equity in your company, and that's what we are doing at Konkrete as well.
So you're doing a offer information statement, which is a pretty innovative way to raise funds for a blockchain-based startup. Tell us about the OIS and how this differs from an ICO.
So let's talk about the difference between equity and tokens first, because that will come to the answer which we are looking at. So let's take an example of a laundromat business. Now there are two ways to raise money for it. You could have these tokens which are used in the laundromat for operating those laundromats, and you can sell these tokens in advance, which is effectively future revenues or future rights to use the system. So that's an analogy to these so-called tokens or the ICOs. So what people are doing as part of ICOs is that they are selling these tokens which represent future use of the system. But if you sold shares in the laundromat, if you sold equity partnerships in the laundromat, that's basically selling shares in that. Now both have value. There is a specific use case for either of them. You could give away these future tokens to build use of the system, seed in use of the system, and you can also attract investors into the platform. So what we are doing at Konkrete is we are actually selling shares in the foundation company. We are going to tokenize it, but that's separate. But we also have a utility token which we call as the KKT token, which will be having use in the system. We're actually giving that away for free to seed in use of the system because we want to build a large user base and we want to reward people for doing certain actions on the system. But we don't see it as a mechanism for fundraising. And we really don't want it to be used as a speculatory asset. We don't want it to be treated as a security. We are using it as a mechanism to boost usage of the system. So for raising money for the business itself, we are selling shares, and the way we are doing it is we are setting up a public company. We already have a public company which is registered in Victoria, Australia, and we have issued an offer information statement which is a bit like a prospectus which a company uses when they list on the stock market, except OIS is like a lower level of a prospectus. It limits you to raise 10 million, and there are some other restrictions as well. But this is fundamentally an IPO on the blockchain, or what is also nowadays described as a security token offering. What Konkrete has done is a bit of a global first. We are doing a full public offer for raising money for a blockchain venture. So we are not doing an ICO, we are not raising money by selling tokens or any of those things. We are sort of doing what is a normal old school way of doing things, but which is a fundamental first for a blockchain venture.
It's fully compliant,
duly lodged with the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, registered, meets all the regulations.
So if I'm a blockchain based startup founder listening to this, why should I explore an OIS instead of an ICO?
I think a lot of blockchain founders and a lot of people in the industry now understand that the era of ICOs is practically over as a mechanism to fundraise. People may argue about how their so-called coins or tokens are really utility tokens, but you are going to quickly find out that the regulator will disagree with you. So, and I'm a bit old school. I subscribe to the regulatory side of things. I subscribe to what ASIC's line of thought on all of these is. So if you want to raise money, then you want to sell shares, and that is actually a good thing from an investor standpoint is because you will then have to describe exactly what your business is going to do, how you are going to, what the risks are, what your revenue model is, what your projected returns are. And that will set you up for the longer run, because you will have people who are long-term stakeholders as investors. And in terms of exploring either or, I don't think that's an either or question, because I think the ICO era is practically over.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. And I guess on a more broader scale, talking about the decentralization of money, you get a lot of pushback now from people saying, crypto is just a passing fad, it's only used by criminals, and things of that sort, on the Silk Road online. Obviously, that's just fear. Even Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan came out and said, Bitcoin is worthless, all this sort of stuff, even though they're now investing in quite a bit of blockchain infrastructure, and we're seeing a lot of the banks and settlement exchanges introducing centralized blockchains to support their way of doing business. But I guess this is nothing new. When paper money came along to replace gold, it took several hundred years for people to truly accept, IOU notes effectively. And if I look at the Tang dynasty, they were the first to introduce paper money back in something like 800 AD. But they ended up abandoning it because there was too much production, and basically the value of the money plummeted. Basically, as you would today, if the RBA prints a lot of money, then the value of that money decreases. And they abandoned it in something like 1455 before reintroducing it about 300 years later. So paper money has obviously had its challenges, and any form of new technology, oftentimes even the internet when it first came along in the early 90s, initially some darker elements of society got on board because they could see how they may use it to support their shady business deals. Now, the modern banking system, the modern financial system has only been around for a couple of hundred centuries. So I think when people look at blockchain, cryptocurrency, the decentralization of money, they are looking at it through the lens of the last, say, 20, 30 years, the world that they know. But the world that they know today isn't necessarily going to be the world of 50 years from now, 100 years from now. So, what are your views on the decentralization of money and the public's perception and or acceptance of it?
I'll talk about the second question first.
Sure.
So, we need to think about blockchain and decentralized money a bit separately. So, for example, blockchain is really a technology.
It has many applications.
It has many applications, and it can be used to support existing systems. So, for example, Konkrete is a distributed share registry. So we are really not creating money. We are just really a mechanism to sort of grease the wheels of the existing systems. We are just coming up with a better mousetrap which works in the existing environment.
You can use it to replace intermediaries.
Correct. So it replaces a lot of middlemen. It makes things a little bit more efficient, far more efficient. Wider distribution has a lot of more features. So that's really the blockchain side of it. Now, in terms of decentralization of money itself or creating money itself, I think I have a lot of strong thoughts about it.
Okay, let's do it.
See, money is a medium of exchange, and people used to use shells and papers and gold coins and silver coins. So it's a medium of exchange, unit of account, etc., etc. But fundamentally, it needs to be accepted by all parties. Now, the only way that could work is if there was a centralized authority which decided which unit is being used as a medium of exchange, what thing is being used as a medium of exchange. What's happened in the last few years, especially since the GFC, is central banks across the world have been basically printing money. There's a lot of quantitative easing happening right now, and that has created a lot of money supply in the market. A lot of these asset prices which are going up, such as housing in particular in Australia, is completely a function of a lot of money flowing into the market, interest rates being very low. So what's happening is the government is basically trying to solve a problem by creating a solution which is going to create a much bigger problem. So, and we have seen this story before. We have seen the Weimar Republic. We have seen what happened in Zimbabwe. And one of the things which people may or may not know is the reason why PayPal was created is Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, etc., they wanted a way for people in third world countries to be able to escape inflationary currencies.
Yep.
So, for example, the Indian currency has dropped recently a lot. A lot of other currencies in the world have also dropped vis-a-vis the US dollar. And the funny thing which people don't really realize is fiat money or paper money or government-backed money is actually not worth anything apart from the credibility of the government itself. And at least Bitcoin, I mean, there are a lot of problems with Bitcoin, there are a lot of problems with a lot of cryptocurrencies, but at least Bitcoin is not created on a whim. At least there is a predictable way in which Bitcoin is created. With government money, what happens is you just have a bunch of old men sitting in a room, the Reserve Bank governors or the central bank governors or the state authorities itself, and saying, okay, we are now going to have so much more money.
Yeah.
And that's complete nonsense. I think there has to be participation from the people who are going to actually use the currency. There have to be clearly defined rules on how and when and if money will be created, so that things are a bit more predictable. I'm personally not an anarchist. I believe in regulation. I believe in making systems work. I don't think existing systems work. But I'm not here to bring down the house. I'm more interested in figuring out how can we come up with a currency which has lasting value.
Yeah.
And it is also recognized. It is not created on a whim, has clearly defined principles on how and when it will be created, and it represents some tangible value without it being a speculatory asset and also being inflationary. So I think that's what I think money should do in the long run.
And it's not necessarily, like you said, about bringing the house down and replacing it with something completely new. It's just about the slow transition to something better. And going back to what we talked about at the start of the show, asking why and how can we get better. And you know what? Maybe it will be something blockchain based, but then it may be something after that. Just like it was gold, and then it was paper money, and then it was digital fiat money, and maybe blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and it will continue to evolve. And if you look back over humanity, I mean, we started with shells and things of that sort as a form of currency. So it's going to constantly evolve, and we shouldn't predispose ourselves to one way of doing things just because that's the one way we've always known.
Yeah, but one of the key things which I would like to highlight is money has collapsed before. I mean, many times. I mean, you have had what happened in Zimbabwe, what happened in the Weimar Republic.
Happened in the Tang Dynasty in 1455.
There was this era when there was this Mississippi scheme where there was a French, in France, I think, around the Tulip Mania, just after the Tulip Mania happened in Netherlands. There was a similar bubble which happened in France where they issued currency which was backed by a venture in Mississippi, where they said in French Louisiana, where they said they found gold, and then for a certain amount of time, a lot of people had faith in that currency, and they speculated on it and traded on it, and then the government basically started printing more and more units because they wanted more money, and eventually, currencies which can be subjected to this kind of abuse are subjected to this kind of abuse. Where if the issuer has the ability to issue more and dilute it without other people without other people recognizing it right away, they will do that. Governments today are doing exactly that. They are printing more currency. And
aren't they the experts though, or so we're led to believe? Aren't they the experts, the central bank? Aren't they in the position of power to decide whether or not to print more money or not print more money based on their assessment of the economic realities?
Yeah, but what's going to happen is, it's very simple. If I have 2 tomatoes, you have $100, the tomato is worth $50. If I have 2 tomatoes and you have $1,000, the tomato is worth $500.
Yes.
It's the simple rule of economics. If you have more money, assets become worth more. That's why housing in Australia has gone through the roof. Not because houses are suddenly cladded with gold or platinum walls. There's no more money in the market. And what's happening is the common man is going to get crushed. And at some point, people are going to recognize it. And at that point, this whole house of cards comes crashing down in not a very nice way.
Yeah, and we're just one step away from primordial chaos, really. I mean, if the...
We always are, isn't it?
Yeah, we always are. As human beings, we think we've evolved so much and that we're so much more sophisticated now than what we were, say, during the Middle Ages. But the reality is, like, if money comes crashing down, 2 or 3 days of no electricity, no trains, no internet, the entire fabric of society comes crashing down, and then our true primordial, primitive nature comes out.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I think the people who have the ability also have a responsibility to do something about it. I think we need to come up with a better system which will prevent all of those things from happening.
I hope so.
Those with great power also have the responsibility.
Couldn't have said it more. Which
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man, yes. Very good, very good. Okay, we'll have to wrap this up with the lightning round, but thank you so much for a very robust, informative conversation, Moresh.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a pleasure, and let's do this. Question number 1. If you could work for any organization at any stage of the company life cycle, who would it be and why? Could be going back to 1978, working with Steve Jobs and Wozniak in a garage. Could be going back to the Renaissance and working with sculptors as part of the Medici family's plans to transform France.
So I'll give a slightly tangential answer. One of my heroes is Alexander Hamilton, and he played a big role in formulating the US government.
Okay.
I am a very big fan of his Federalist Papers. I would have liked to work with him on that particular thing, because he sort of was very active in laying down the rules and structures which led to a very stable or a very strong government. Okay. One of the most flexible forms of government. Yeah,
that's an interesting answer, and it's definitely a bit tangential, but very, very well said.
The reason I said is because he was involved in laying down rules, which is what most blockchain companies are doing now.
Yep.
And I think there's a lot of lessons we can draw from people of that era.
Yeah, and I think in general, when people are building a business, they just look to business books and other businesses to determine how they might build their own business and use them as models. But you can take models from any line of work. I myself have read lots of books on military strategy and Musashi's Book of the Five Rings, Sun Tzu's Art of War, even books by Stanley McChrystal from the US military. There's so many lessons. Like we talked about burning the bridges earlier. So many lessons that you can apply in your business.
Absolutely.
Empowering the troops. Don't have that top-down leadership, because if your enemy is moving faster than you and they've got better communication lines, you're going to end up on the back foot very quickly. So you need to empower your troops on the ground with decision-making authority. Yeah, fantastic. Question number 2, Moresh, is if you could ask anyone a question, dead or alive, and it may be Alex Hamilton, who would it be and what would you ask?
Oh, wow. I think I would, when Steve Jobs got diagnosed with cancer, I think he became very crystal clear about how you should live your life.
What matters to him.
What matters to him.
Yeah.
I would have liked to ask him where did he find the courage to do that. I mean, to some extent we all know the answer. There was no other option. I mean, the only option was sit in your bed and cry, but I would have liked to hear it firsthand from him. Yeah. How did he manage to deal with that and do the best what he could in his remaining days? Yeah,
well, he probably went through, the 5 stages? Yeah. Refusing to accept it,
denial, anger,
and then acceptance, and just planning to go and do what he had to do and spend his last days with his family. Yeah. Great answer. And I know I saw Steve Blank speak many years ago, and obviously serial entrepreneur and godfather of Silicon Valley, as they like to say, and one of his big regrets speaking in front of an audience of about 450 in Melbourne was that not spending enough time with his family, I think. And what would he like to be remembered as? Most of all, a loving husband and father, not a entrepreneur as such.
Yeah, I think the purpose of life eventually is to create new life. And I have a son now, 21-month-old.
Congratulations.
My only hope is, thank you. My only hope is he knows all the things which I know now sooner. Then he can do whatever he wants with it.
Yeah. Well, and that's why we create content. That's why we host these podcasts. That's why we read books. If we all went into this life with no prior knowledge, we would still be walking around, maybe not even hitting each other on the head with clubs, because it would take generations to come up with the concept of a club. So we're all just building
I think we need
upon.
to pass. I think with your book as well, you have done a great job. Where if you can pass that knowledge to other people, then they don't have to waste that much time trying to come up with all of that.
Exactly. So that leads into my final question, my final lightning round question, just around habits, rituals, routines. What do you do to stay on top of your game? Obviously, you're a voracious reader. What else do you do to just keep that fire burning? Philosophy, books, what else? You said you struggle with going to the gym, so maybe we can work on that. But
I don't actually read as much as I like to these days, because I think obviously you have only a limited amount of time.
Of course. Especially when you're reading books like Atlas Shrugged, which is 1,200 pages long.
Oh, well, if I get another book like that, I would still, and I try to read a lot of history, because I think you can draw lessons from it a lot. There are clear parallels. History doesn't repeat itself, I would say, but it does rhyme. And like you previously said, within business, you can take lessons from all other aspects of life as well, whether they're government, whether they're military, whether they're social. I think understanding how things have worked previously, I think that is something which appeals to me a lot. And also, surprisingly, I find YouTube to be a very good source of understanding new stuff. For example, there is a series of videos about CRISPR technology, which is like the biological thing.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of new things which are happening. Just understanding the implications of what that will come up, that will lead to, blows my mind. So I'm quite interested in what has happened before and what is likely to happen in the future. Because then it can tell me what I need to do now. Yeah,
you just need to be careful not to go down the YouTube rabbit hole and spend countless hours looking at videos and reading comments and engaging.
No.
You definitely want to stay away from those comments.
I don't look at comments.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Moresh, for your time today. If people want to find out more about Estate Baron, they can visit estatebaron.com. And if they want to find out about Konkrete and perhaps register for the OIS once it comes out, they can head over to Konkrete.io.
Our offer is already registered with ASIC. We will be opening it up in the next few days. So check out Konkrete.io.
Fantastic. We'll add that to the show notes for our listeners. Thanks again, Moresh. Any parting words of wisdom?
Thank you for having me.
That's very well said. Cheers. All right. Hi guys, Steve again. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to receive a weekly email from me, complete with reflections, books I've been reading, words of wisdom, and access to blogs, ebooks, and more that I'm publishing on a regular basis, just leave your details at futuresquared.xyz/subscribe and you'll receive the very next one. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, take a minute to like, share, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It goes a long way to giving the podcast the exposure it needs so I can continue bringing you guests and conversations of the highest caliber. You can catch me on Twitter at Steve Glibeski and on Instagram at TheSteveGlibeski. Until next time,
Hasta la vista.